The Watcher in the Woods. Todd was very excited to start his new part-time job. He had been hired to help out at a bookshop on the edge of town. Not only did this make Todd feel very grown up and proud, but he was also looking forward to having more spending money than any allowance he had ever had before. Everything was shaping up to be perfect. Well, that is, except for getting there. The hours clashed with his parents' work, so they couldn't drive him, and his bicycle had recently broken. This meant he had no choice but to walk there. Fortunately, the walk wasn't bad. He could be there in 20 minutes if he moved quickly, or he could even cut the time in half to 10 minutes if he took the shortcut through the woods. Why wouldn't you take the shortcut, you might be wondering to yourself. Well, word around town was that there was a frightening entity that lurked in those woods. Local kids had taken to calling it the Watcher in the Woods. They said that if you were to go through the forest alone, the Watcher would appear and begin following you. He'd start out slow, but then pick up his pace until he was frighteningly fast. If he got a hold of you, rumor was that you'd never be seen again. If you wanted to pass through the woods safely, it was said that you'd need to move quickly. As fast as you may have thought you were, odds were that the Watcher was faster. Your only hope was to make it past the tree line of the forest. The Watcher in the woods couldn't venture there. Once you made it out, you'd be safe. Or at least, that's what they said, anyways. Todd thought himself far too old to still believe in silly, childish tales, but he couldn't deny that the thought of this strange figure had spooked him a bit. He'd never admit it to his friends, but the thought of a Watcher lingered on his mind so greatly that, for the first week of work, he chose to walk the long way so he would not have to enter the forest. Despite the route being a little annoying, taking twice as long to get to work, this worked out just fine. That is, until one day, Todd found himself running late. He was still rather new at the job and knew that showing up late wouldn't look good while he was trying to make a good impression. While walking to work, Todd came up to the point of the trail that veered off to the shortcut, and he had to make a decision. Todd swallowed hard as he looked up a little path that led into the forest. He then looked down at his watch and realized that if he took the normal way, he'd be almost 10 full minutes late. But if he took the shortcut, he'd get there just in time. Not wanting to make a bad impression, Todd took a deep breath and headed into the woods. For a while, things seemed perfectly normal. Todd chuckled to himself for having been so foolish as to let a silly story frighten him. The forest around him was actually rather pretty, and the path made for a gentle walk. He only had a few more minutes of walking, and he'd pop out the other side, very close to the bookshop. However, the longer Todd walked, the darker it grew. The forest was getting thicker, so less light was reaching the trail. What's worse is that Todd could swear that he could hear the footsteps of someone else walking a distance behind him. Frightened, Todd stopped walking and held his breath as he listened. But only the quiet sounds of a forest could be heard. So he began walking again, and it continued to get darker. It was getting much darker than it should have. Tom felt his heartbeat quicken as he noticed this. Even if the forest was thick, there was no way it should be getting this dark. It practically looked like it was nighttime. Deciding that he wanted to get out of the forest as quickly as possible, Todd began walking faster, and again he heard it. Step, step, Step crunch. There was definitely someone following him. He turned around, but still saw no sign of anyone else in the forest. At this point, Todd was starting to feel very afraid, so he decided to walk a little quicker. But as he walked quicker, the sound of footsteps behind him also started to get faster. They also got louder. Todd looked over his shoulder once more and felt his blood run cold. For only a moment he saw it, a shadowy figure jumping out of sight behind a tree. Terrified and not knowing what else to do, Todd quickened his pace. But as he grew nearly to a sprint, the footsteps grew even faster behind him. By now it was so dark that Todd could barely see the path in front of him. He looked over his shoulder and could see the form of something in the shadows. It was following him. And even worse, he could now see something else. Big, white eyes. Todd was so frightened he broke into a sprint, running as fast as he could. The footsteps grew louder and louder, closer and closer. He could feel a hot, sticky breath on the back of his neck. Just when he thought he was done for, Todd suddenly stumbled out of a forest into the clearing on the other side of the forest. And just like that, things were normal again. The sun was shining and life went on as normal. Todd couldn't believe his eyes. He ran clear to the other side of the street before turning around. When he did, Todd saw a shadowy figure with big white eyes standing just at the edge of a forest. It watched him for a moment before slowly slinking back into the trees. Todd always made sure to leave for work with plenty of time from then on.